you have to give the Rocky franchise a lot of credit. We're on the eighth movie and they're still pumping out films of good quality that are fun to watch. So I went to see Creed 2 the other day. My father really wanted to go see it, and I said, why not? It's a Rocky movie. It can't be bad. The only bad Rocky movie, in my opinion, was Rocky 5. But this one looked good from the trailer. I liked the idea behind it. I like the whole idea of the Creed movies. So I just want to address this a bit because there are people who have criticized these saying like it's casting, it's affirmative action, it's politically correct. And I think they missed the mark on this one. There's a lot of movies like the new Star Wars movies where they just kind of shove minorities in inappropriate places. And it's very clear that it's not part of the actual story. It's just there to increase their diversity quotas. But this really isn't the case. It's not as if Apollo Creed was a minor character in the previous Rocky films. He was a main character almost as much as Rocky was. And kind of his relationship with Rocky is kind of one of the driving forces of the series up to and including Rocky 4. They were best friends. Rocky's life was kind of defined by trying to beat Apollo. And then Apollo trains him in the third movie. And then Apollo dies in Rocky 4. Also, a part of Rocky's character arc is his son didn't follow in his footsteps. Michael didn't become a fighter. He didn't even really get along with Rocky very well. He became a businessman, whereas Rocky's stayed in kind of his working class house that he's lived in for the last 50 years or so. Rocky has no real desire to go out to the wider world or for anything fancier than kind of his humble roots in Philly. So they don't really get along. So the idea was if they were going to have a passing of the torch, it would have been like what happened in Rocky 5 where Rocky went and found Tommy Gunn and took him under his wing. But they thought, instead of taking a random person like Tommy Gunn, let's take someone with actual relevance to the series. So the main character of this is Adonis Creed, which is a great name, who is the illegitimate son of Apollo Creed. So his backstory is apparently his mother died, I think sometime after Apollo died, and Apollo Creed's wife took him in and raised him as her son. I'm not sure how long. I don't remember all of Creed 1, if she raised him since he was a child or it was just later in life. But he grew up on stories of his father, etc. And when he decided he wanted to be a boxer, he went to Rocky. And Rocky kind of took him under his wing, and he trained him to be tough. He trained him to be a fighter. And kind of his character arc, Adonis's character arc, is to try to be what his father was and to achieve his father. Because he kind of knows his father solely through fighting because he never met him in real life. And Adonis is kind of the rare example of a black character who's authentically black. And I'm sure people will misinterpret that, but who comes across as a realistic, like African American, but who doesn't feel like they were just shoved into the movie for diversity points. Like, I like to point out, I think the best use of an African American character in like a movie is maybe Lando Calrissian, because Billy D. Williams is a good actor. Lando is a very like authentically African American character. Like, he is the smarmy Mississippi riverboat gambler, and he doesn't feel out of place at all in the film. He really complements it, as opposed to Finn, who's obviously just shoehorned in for diversity's sake. So Adonis Creed is that, and it's nice to see that in a film where it's not just shoved in. And he's a really likable guy. He's an honorable man. He's very dedicated to fighting. Near the beginning of the movie, he marries his longtime girlfriend. They have a child together. He's dedicated to becoming a good father. Their child is deaf because his girlfriend and eventual wife is deaf, and she inherits it from him. And he's a bit sad, but after he talks to Rocky, Rocky's like, don't feel sorry for her. She won't. And basically, he decides he's going to love his daughter and he's going to raise her the best as possible and provide her with a stable family, which makes him better than the vast majority of his peers. But no, he's a likable man. He's an honorable man. He's a good protagonist. He's a worthy successor to Apollo Creed and Rocky. as the main character of these films. And I really like him. And I don't really like the music necessarily, but they kind of, I think they made the transition from kind of the 1980s Philly working class background of Rocky to kind of the more flashy glamour of the modern era very well. And it doesn't feel contrived, and it doesn't feel like they're just milking the franchise. It felt very natural. I think it was kind of a brilliant idea to bring in Apollo Creed's son and to make him the main character. Because the Rocky movies have a lot of heart to them. They have a lot of, I don't know if depth is the right word, but they do a really good job dealing with kind of themes in a grand level, and kind of the character interactions are really good and really solid. So in the previous movie, in Creed 1, Creed went up against the heavyweight champion of the world, I think, or some really famous boxer who was on his way to prison, and they basically pulled him out because of his name and because he's a Creed. And that's very much like Rocky 1, where Apollo Creed pulls Rocky out because he's Italian and it's the 250th anniversary of America, and he wants to fight an Italian in kind of honor of that, and Rocky's name, the Italian Stallion, is really catchy, and Rocky loses, but he does much better than anyone expected. And that's what happens with Creed. He loses, but he becomes a legend in his own right. And at the beginning of this movie, he beats the current world champion, and he becomes the world heavyweight champion. So it's good. So you have kind of the similar arc. That's what happened with Rocky. He came back in the second movie, and he became champion. Now, the other kind of genius thing to this is part of him fulfilling his father's legacy is to have to face down the monster that his father couldn't beat. If he's going to make a legacy of his own, he has to do what his father could not do. And that's where Victor Drago comes in. So after his defeat in Rocky IV, Ivan Drago was cast out of Valhalla for not knowing the riddle of steel. He got kicked out of the Communist Party. They revoked his boxing status, etc. And he got basically demoted, and he's now working class, sub-working class. He's living in basically poverty and squalor in the Ukraine along with his son. His QT wife left him shortly after the events of Rocky IV with his infant son, Victor Drago. And he's raised his son basically on hate. He's been training him his whole life because he wants revenge. He wants his son to either kill Rocky or just to get back at the world. And his son is 6'4", 250 pounds of solid muscle. He's a monster. He's in some ways even bulkier than Dolph Lundgren was in Rocky IV. And he's just entirely dedicated to just wiping the floor with everybody. So he comes and he issues a challenge to Adonis. He's like, I want to have the rematch. I want you to do what your father did and to fight me. And kind of one of the themes in this film is Rocky says to Creed, if you want to win, you have to be fighting to prove something to yourself and not to prove something to other people. And Adonis initially goes in and fights him the first time because he's trying to prove something to everybody else. And he loses the first time. But then when he comes back, he's trying to prove something to himself. Whereas Victor doesn't really want to fight for himself. He wants to fight to make his father proud of him because he respects his father. And that's kind of the ultimate downfall of him is that. So they have their big fight. And I mean, if this was realistic, Victor Drago would probably kill him in the first 2 minutes of the fight. The kind of punching power that Victor has, I think, would just split his skull open. But this is a Rocky movie. If the fight between Rocky Balboa and Victor Drago had been at all realistic, Victor Drago probably would have killed him in the first 2 minutes of the fight. Not Victor Drago, Ivan Drago, because Dolph Lundgren's huge. And Stallone is jacked for his size, but he's nowhere near big enough to take on Ivan Drago. To take on an absolute beast like Ivan. And Same thing in this movie. So he gets his ass handed to him by Victor. He gets really badly beat up. What's kind of interesting is he asks Rocky to train him in preparation for the fight, and Rocky refuses to train him because Rocky is haunted by not throwing in the towel and saving his father's life back in Rocky 4. It's something that has always haunted him. It's something that it's the greatest regret of his life. So yeah, he gets beat up really bad. He almost dies. He's in the hospital. And Rocky comes to see him and they reconcile. And Creed kind of goes through a point where he's just scared. He can't get back in the boxing ring. And you just have a lot of kind of reflection on that. Ivan Drago is now back in vogue in the Russian circles. He gets to go to like the ambassador's house. His son becomes the hero of Russian boxing, and they gear up for the rematch. So like all Rocky movies, there's a training montage. In Rocky 4, Rocky had gone out to the Siberian wasteland to train, and his protege Adonis Creed goes out and trains in the desert, the desert outside of Los Angeles. Like in the Nevada desert. So we get a training montage that's reminiscent of Rocky 4, and then they have their rematch, and it goes very similar to the rematch in Rocky 4 between Rocky and Ivan Drago, and Creed wins. And what's kind of interesting is Victor Drago is just a knockout fighter. He doesn't have a lot of endurance. He's just built to basically kill people in the first couple rounds. Not that there's anything wrong with that, because like I said, this was all realistic. He would have killed him in the first like 2 minutes of the fight. But he just keeps getting back up, and he has no strength left to really fight Adonis. And actually, Ivan goes and throws in the towel. And he says, "It's okay, son. I'm proud of you. You did your best. You succeeded." And they've kind of resolved their differences, sort of. So Adonis is now a legend in his own right. He's accomplished what his father couldn't and beat a Drago. And Ivan and his son now have a repaired relationship, and they go back and work together, and they start training together again. Hopefully his son still has a career. I mean, I don't see why he wouldn't have a career. He could beat pretty much anybody else in the world other than Creed. I don't even think they're in the same weight class, because Drago is super heavyweight and Creed is just heavyweight. So he should still be able to become the super heavyweight champion of the world, right? And the movie ends with Rocky finally going to see his son again. And I think they did a good job. They had just enough Rocky in the movie. He's still a main character, but it's not about him per se anymore. Stallone, I think, wrote this movie. Yeah, he wrote this movie. And he also produced it. He didn't direct it, though, but he was very intimately involved with it. So I thought it was a good use of Ivan Drago. Victor Drago is a good new villain to have. Adonis Creed is a good main character. Overall, excellent, enjoyable movie. Lots of good themes, lots of good shout-outs and callbacks without just being a flat-out remake. I think it did a good job of paying homage while still being its own film. Overall, I give Creed 2 two big thumbs up out of 2, I guess. Love the film. Talk to you guys later.